The Philadelphia Eagles took down the Green Bay Packers 22-10, but the offense was sluggish for most of the day as they finished with just 290 total yards, with Jaylen Herz only throwing for 131. So what happened in this game, and is it cause for concern? Let's start with the passing game because that is the area that most people are worried about. Hertz was 13 for 21 passing for 131 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions, but he also took some ugly sacks and missed a few plays. When breaking it down by half, Jalen's first half, he was 6 of 13 passing for 39 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 sack, and 1 scramble for 8 yards. In the second half, he was 7 of 8, he had 92 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 sack, and 1 scramble that resulted in a holding penalty. This has been on par with Jaylen Herz for much of the season. When we look at the first half of games among the top 40 quarterbacks and pass attempts, he ranks 18th in completion percentage, 18th in yards per attempt, 19th in average throw depth, and 37th in sack rate. In the second half, he's 6th in completion percentage, 1st in yards per attempt, 13th in average throw depth, and 25th in sack rate. This has been a big theme for Jaylen Herz this season as he plays much more confidently as the game progresses. But coming into this game, there's some questions about if Jaylen Herz would be rusty, and I think there were several areas you could point to that would say yes, he had some rust in this game. Hertz not playing for 3 weeks had a real impact, and there's more to it than him not playing in these games for 3 weeks, right? In 2004, Donovan McNabb had a similar time off where he only played 1 series in week 16, he rested in week 17, and then the Eagles had a bye week in the first round of the playoffs, and he still did well in the playoffs. But Jaylen Hertz couldn't even practice for 2 weeks. That affects your rhythm, your timing, and your confidence. Donovan McNabb was still able to practice, he just didn't play in those games, right? So that is a real factor. But despite what Dan Orlovsky said about Hertz not being rusty, you could see the effects of him not being in rhythm on film, and not to mention Ryan Fitzpatrick disagreed with his take as well. Let's look at a couple plays that illustrates what I'm talking about. The Eagles missed a touchdown on this wheel route to Saquon Barkley out of the backfield. The Eagles get the exact play they want against this coverage. The Packers are in quarters coverage, and with the Eagles motioning Devontae into a trips formation, the will linebackers essentially left one-on-one covering Saquon Barkley. Saquon sells the route like it's an underneath choice route, then bursts down the sideline, but for some reason, Jaylen doesn't take the throw. We saw him make this throw against the Jaguars earlier in the season. And Kellen Moore also dialed up this play for a huge Tony Pollard touchdown against the Vikings several seasons ago against a very similar coverage to what the Eagles saw from the Packers. Looking at this next play, the Eagles call a variation of a concept called shallow cross. I saw people pointing to this play as a bad design, but it's prevalent in almost every playbook across the league. It's designed to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands quick, and it's all based on timing and throwing to leverage. The Lions used almost an identical variation of this play earlier this year. And here, we see the Rams using it to find space underneath in zone coverage. The throw is often a tight window throw, but it's a fairly safe play, although it requires you to play with good rhythm and accuracy, throwing to the inside leverage of the receiver. When we look at the execution for the Eagles, I think Dallas Goedert could have run the route with more urgency and then snapped the route off a little bit quicker. But when we look at Hertz, his footwork looks like he's not ready or confident to throw the concept. Which leads me to believe this is some rust of not playing because against the Steelers, he ran the same exact concept and we see him get the ball out quickly with efficient footwork and an accurate throw to the inside shoulder of Devontae Smith. Regardless, the issue is compounded by Hertz not throwing the ball away, which is something we saw on another play in the game as well. The Eagles run this play later in the game against man coverage, and we see how Goedert continues on the drag route against man coverage as opposed to finding a spot to settle against zone coverage. But Hertz was generally quicker and more decisive as the game went on. Let's look at this play in the fourth quarter. Here we see the Eagles running one of their cover 2 beaters that they've used throughout the season. A.J. Brown is running the clear out route designed to occupy the pull runner in cover 2. Devontae Smith is running a boundary dig that's supposed to attack the void created by A.J.'s clear out. But the hook defender sinks into the window, and Jaylen quickly gets to Dallas Goedert underneath. Good read and a quick decisive throw. This play is usually designed to go to A.J. Brown, so the fact that he's running the decoy route makes me think his knee is really limiting him. But moving on, Hertz wasn't the only reason the passing game struggled. There were some protection issues as well. On this play, Mekhi Becton had his outside shoulder pried open on a bull rush, and that likely played a factor on this inaccurate pass to A.J. Brown on a slant. There was also this play from Cam Jurgens where he gets both hands on the inside shoulder of the defensive tackle, and that lets the defensive tackle have an easy path to get outside of him. Let's look in depth at a couple of other plays. On this play, we see the Eagles use a gap scheme play action protection plan. The entire line slides to the right, besides Mekhi Becton, who is pulling to the left to block the defensive end. The protection is good, and Jaylen finds AJ on the curl. But later in the game, we see a similar protection plan, but something gets messed up. Dickerson pulls like he's gonna block the end like we saw from Becton on the previous play, but Becton and Lane don't slide, and Dickerson ends up double teaming with Lane Johnson. The problem arises when Jurgens doesn't pick up the defensive tackle because he's expecting Becton to be sliding to pick up the defensive tackle when he slants inside. This forces Jaylen to bail the pocket, and it results in a throwaway. On another play, the Packers come out in a cover 0 blitz look. The line slides to the right, and Saquon should be picking up the edge rusher, but for some reason, Saquon slides the same way as the line. There's going to be an unblocked rusher because that's just what's going to happen against cover 0, but leaving that edge rusher unblocked forces Jaylen to bail on the throw, and it's inaccurate. I like some of the concepts the Eagles had, and I talked in the preview show how their corners will give you curls, comebacks, and out routes. They really want to take away the deep pass, and that's generally what Jaylen is comfortable throwing. We saw the Eagles connect on 3 of these plays. One was an out route to Devontae from under center, while 2 others were from the 4 verts family, where the outside receiver will convert to a curl route against off coverage. We saw the Eagles run the same 4 verts play twice in a row, but for some reason they didn't convert to the curls on the outside the second time, and it resulted in a scramble that led to a holding penalty. But some of the execution and or designs of the concepts I think could have been better as well. For example, we have this play against cover 0 where Jaylen checks at the line, but there's some confusion from the receivers and both run routes in the same area. We also have the play that resulted in a touchdown to Jahan Dotson. The Packers are running quarters in the red zone. The quarter hook defender has to push out to the side with the 3 receiving threats, leaving a vacated area over the middle. The Eagles run Dallas Goedert on a basic route, with Devontae Smith running what's probably an option route underneath. The quarter flat defender follows Devontae to the flat, leaving a huge void on the inside, but I don't like how deep Dallas Goedert's route is. To me, this needs to be a shorter route that's faster developing and not pushing so far into the safety that's matching Goedert. Here's an example against the Arizona Cardinals. It's quite obvious how much quicker developing this route is to take advantage of the defense's spacing. We also see another example from the Raiders. Brock Bowers is breaking on the route on his 6th step. Looking back at the Eagles play, Goedert breaks on his route on the 9th step. I also didn't like this decision to run this RPO on 3rd down. To me, that's a better play on 1st or 2nd down, and really, the Eagles had the numbers for Jaylen to run this up the middle. But by far, my biggest gripe with the game planning coming into this game is why they didn't use more play action plays to get Jaylen Herz outside of the pocket, especially following a week where they used this strategy extensively with Tanner McKee. I could go on detailing a few other plays and why they didn't work, but the same themes showed up. Overall, the passing game was disjointed, and like what is usually true when a team underachieves relative to expectations, there's many different factors involved. Let's also not forget that this Packers defense was playing at a top 5 level in many aspects, and this was the healthiest that they've been almost the entire season, and Jaylen hadn't played in several weeks. But regardless, the Eagles were able to pull out the victory, although they will need to improve on these areas as the playoffs roll on. Looking at the running game, they were much more efficient in that area. Saquon Barkley had 119 yards on 25 carries and could have had a 76-yard touchdown if he was a selfish player. We talked about in the preview that the Packers had a stout run defense this season, hitting ball carries behind the line of scrimmage at the 4th highest rate in the NFL, while averaging the 4th best yards per carry allowed on design runs and the 3rd best yards before contact allowed per attempt of any team in the NFL. But the Eagles' offensive line was the more physically dominant unit in the ground game. Saquon averaged 4.8 yards before contact per attempt, which was well above the Packers season average. They would regularly create vertical displacement on the line of scrimmage, and I thought they did a good job with their concepts. In the preview episodes, we detailed how the Packers' defensive line tries to shoot gaps and create penetration, and one way to counter this was to use pin and pull runs to the edge. We see that at play here as the Eagles pin the edge rusher inside and pull Dickerson and Jurgens to the 2nd level. They motion AJ Brown from inside to outside to get a better angle to block Xavier McKinney. A better block from AJ, and this play probably goes for more yards. We saw the Eagles come back to this concept later in the game, but with a different presentation. This time, instead of motioning AJ from inside to out, they motion him from out wide to inside the box to crack block the safety. They're able to pin the defensive end inside and get a solid gain, but they left some yards on the field as Jurgens ignores the linebacker and instead blocks the safety that AJ is already blocking. They also took advantage of the aggressive front with different variations of trap plays. Here we see the Eagles motion Devontae Smith across the formation, which bumps the nickel out of the fit, moves the linebackers over a gap, and brings the safety into the run fit. They run a play called crunch, which is in the trap family. Both guards are going to pull to their left with the center and left tackle working up to the linebackers, while Dallas Goedert wham blocks the 3 technique. The motion is key because it allowed Johnny Wilson to have a better matchup on his crack block. It's typically much easier to block a safety than a linebacker. This play is also tough for the linebackers. This action by the guard and center looks like a typical counter or power run play, so he chases the run the opposite way of where the run is designed to hit. Good play call and design here, and they're just one missed tackle away from a big run. The thing is, the Eagles still left yards on the table in the run game as well. We see this outside zone play where Mailata and Dickerson run the defensive end off the ball, but Grant Calcaterra decides to leave the outside linebacker unblocked and seal a linebacker that Mailata and Dickerson were responsible for on their combo block. We see the Eagles run quarterback counter bash, but Mailata whiffs on the block and lets the defensive end across his face, which forces Lane Johnson to block him, but Lane isn't able to seal the end either, and we see the Eagles not able to capitalize on all this space in front of them. We also saw a designed run from Hertz where he has room to run up the middle, but he then bounces the run to the sideline and gets 1 yard on a play that he had already gained 4. To make matters worse, Devontae is not expecting the run to go outside, and he ends up holding the defender, putting them in 2nd and long. Penalties were an issue for the Eagles as they would continually put themselves in 2nd and 3rd and long situations that they couldn't get themselves out of. This was just a handful of plays, but there's more where there are similar issues. But in the end, this run game is so dominant that they were still able to rush for 169 yards when they weren't perfect. And that run game will need to continue being dominant as the playoffs roll on. But that will be it for today's show, and stay tuned as we'll be back with a defensive review on the next episode.